was to go to Palestine and reclaim Palestine, which was the ancient land of the Jews. Now, people have moved around all over the world from place to place, but very few people, nobody else really said we have to go back 2,000 years and take the land of people who are presently living there. But the Zionist movement was designed from the beginning, even though it covered it up, to have a Jewish state in Palestine, not a multinational state, but a Jewish state. Jews have lived in Palestine for thousands of years, but these were what they call Mizrahi, Middle Eastern Jews, not European Jews. And when the Zionists of Europe determined that they were going to have a state in Palestine, they did not consult the Jews that were living in other Arab countries, in Iraq, in Iran, in North Africa. They've been living there for years, largely in peace, in different situations in every country. In Iraq, they were in the finance ministry, close to high government. They were living very well. They were not consulted. One of the byproducts of the creation of Israel was the virtual emptying out over about a 10-year period or 20-year period of most of the Jews from the Arab countries, not all, but most of them. But one of the problems is that Israel was essentially a Western colonial country, a European colonial country, settling in a non-European setting in the Middle East, which are largely Arab, dark-skinned people, not European. Even if it had not been Jews, let's say it had been Christians, there would have been an anti-colonial movement against that settlement. And the Zionist movement was described as a colonial settler movement by the Zionists themselves, because at that time colonial settler did not have a bad name. It was a time imperialism did not have a bad name, as it does today. And so what happened is you have a normal reaction on part of the people who were dispossessed, in this case the Palestinians, to reject, the host rejecting this foreign implant, which was a European colony of Jews, essentially, coming in.
In 1948, right?
Well, they started, Jews had started settling from Europe back in the late 1880s, coming from Russia. There had been pogroms in Russia, but they weren't there as Zionists to have a state. They were there to go back to the land, so to speak. But when the Zionist movement started, the political movement of Herzl in 1896, in the early 1900s, the organized Zionist movement decided they would have a Jewish state in Palestine. And in 1917, they got the British Lord Balfour to declare that Palestine should be a Jewish homeland.
All right. So then what did happen in 1948?
In 1947, November 29th, 50 years ago this November, the UN voted to partition Palestine into a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. Now, at that time, the Jews were only 30% of the population and only owned 6% of the land. And yet the UN, which was essentially the colonizing powers of the world,
right, vis-a-vis the Security Council.
Yeah, the Security Council.
The Permanent Security Council basically runs
you
the
had
whole
the
show.
France colonial power, British colonial power, U.S. colonial power.
With the veto, and so that even though there are almost 200 nations represented, they
don't have any power.
They don't have
and so you had them giving Jews, who owned 6% of the land, 55% of Palestine, and the Palestinian Arabs 45%. The Palestinian Arabs were not consulted. I ask anybody out there, if so the UN took a vote to give the city of San Francisco to people who are not born there, and say that those who are born there did not have the same rights anymore that those who were coming in, I think people of San Francisco would fight.
Of course we would.
Anybody. This is natural.
Of course.
That the Palestinians are supposed to say that they rejected this partition. And then the UN, feeling bad, did vote in a resolution 194 that the Palestinian who were forced to flee should have the right to return. That is the right to return that cannot be negotiated away by the Palestinian puppets at the moment, who are the leaders, so-called leaders of the Palestinian Authority, who are not do not represent the Palestinian people.
You're referring to Fatah?
Led
by
Abbas and Fayed and
right.
the San Francisco State graduate Saeb Erekat, they're really pathetic. They would have a difficult time coming to the United States and speaking to Palestinian audiences without being booed. Matter of fact, without the protection of the Israeli army, they would probably not survive in the West Bank.
Right. Well, let's talk for a minute about this so-called peace conference in Annapolis, which, as you told me earlier, means what does it mean?
Annapolis means in Arabic, I am the policeman. I am the police.
Right.
Anna me, I am.
Yeah,
That's
and they
me.
are.
That's me. It's ironic that it was held in one of the representations of U.S. imperialism, the U.S. Naval Academy.
In the police state.
In Annapolis. This is the latest episode in a charade, a game that's been played by the Zionists with the United States collusion for many years. Because one thing Israel continues to do is create what they call facts on the ground. Even with Oslo in 1993, in which Yasser Arafat betrayed the Palestinians by doing something that was technically illegal, he signed away the land of Palestine in 1993 at Oslo without getting anything in return. And at Oslo in 93, not a single Palestinian lawyer was allowed to attend the negotiations, because had they, and there are a number of very fine Palestinian lawyers in the West Bank and Gaza, had they gone to Oslo, they would never have agreed to this deal.
Right.
So, but what happened is Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel, who along with Arafat was given the Nobel Peace Prize, continued to expand Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
And they're expanding as we speak.
As we speak. And the U.S., unfortunately, it was a U.S. position, and the position of every president since Richard Nixon, for Israel to actually get out of the occupied territories. This was first Egypt, Syria, and the West Bank and Gaza, not for the benefit of the Syrians, the Palestinians, or Egyptians, but because it was not in the U.S. interest. There is not any good argument I've ever seen advanced why the U.S. gains anything from Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, or previously Gaza, or the Syrian Golan Heights. Carter was determined to make peace in the Middle East, and he really strong-armed Israel into giving up the Sinai, which has oil, by the way, and returning the Sinai. And in exchange, they had to give Israel and Egypt so much money. But the Israel lobby, the Zionist lobby, the most powerful lobby in the United States, one might say they've hijacked the American political process. I say that.
I totally agree.
Well, what happened is they have never forgiven Carter for Camp David. Here's Carter arranged a peace with Egypt, but it forced Israel to give up land. So the Zionists, both in Israel and particularly in the United States, who have a vested interest in maintaining a belligerent Israel, I should say, have opposed every kind of peace negotiation agreement, no matter how unjust it would be. So they opposed Madrid when George Bush Sr. had a Madrid conference. They did not support Oslo, and what support they gave was lukewarm. They were against Annapolis. They were finding all kinds of things wrong, because the reality is, should there be a peace between Israel and the surrounding Arab countries and the Palestinians, forget how much justice there is, and Israel could no longer be conceived as being a belligerent force and possibly useful to the U.S., the power of the lobby would dissipate like a balloon that had lost its air.